and welcome back to this week's episode of the Guided Podcast. We are back to discuss an important energetic theme going on right now with my partner in crime, Catherine Ann, are also our resident intuitive astrologer. So, Catherine, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can kick off our energetic theme right now.
Okay, thank you. So I went into the Akashic Records to ask what is a theme or a conversation that is most relevant for our collective right now. And what they really brought to me was this idea that, yes, we're in it right now. The storm, we're in it. Although they were very clear, we're just at the beginning of it. There's a stronger rush to come. But the importance of being flexible, being in the flow, trusting in the experience, trusting in your connection with the divine, acknowledging that we create our reality. And this is not to ignore or belittle the true scenario that we're seeing out in our world where people are hurting and there's a lot of fear and hatred and uncertainty that's happening right now very loudly in our collective. And at the same time, that reminder that all is well. All is well. Although I don't know that I necessarily can look around and see what's happening out in the collective and understand all is well, but they're asking us to trust it and to know that on the other side of this will be a beautiful space. It's just a matter of the journey to get there.
Yeah, as you talk about this, I think the thing that Spirit has been talking to me about recently that reminds me of everything you're talking about, they introduced me to this concept that I hadn't heard before called metamorphosis anxiety. And when you think about changing from one form to another, or in this, anytime I hear the word metamorphosis, I always think about the caterpillar changing form into a butterfly. And if you think about it, in order for a caterpillar to morph into that butterfly, it literally has to go into a cocoon, it goes into the darkness, and it literally dissolves itself in the darkness before it can reemerge as this beautiful butterfly with wings. And I think this is happening both internally and on an individual level. And then this is also happening in a macro cosmo kind of way where we are seeing this on a global scale. And so internally, we are the microcosm of the macrocosm and vice versa. And so, what I feel like is happening and what I've learned myself over the past few years of being in this place of darkness because of dramatic change in my life, what I've learned is that we just push and we strain and we push up against change because it is so uncomfortable. And what spirit has been teaching me is how important it is for us to actually name our vulnerability, to name the emotion vulnerable, how vulnerable it feels to change from one form to another, how vulnerable it feels to literally let go of the past and morph into this version of ourselves that we're not familiar with. That's who we're becoming, but we're required to be really present in the moment, right here, right now, with who we want to become. And that really requires us cutting all ties to the pain of the past. We cannot be a past version of ourselves while also trying to step into a new version of ourselves. They cannot exist simultaneously. And so I think this is where the resistance comes into play, right? Because the very definition of resistance is that gap between who we are and who we want to be. And so it's so important to hold ourselves in the vulnerability of who we're becoming. But the way to do it is by holding our power, by maintaining and grounding into that inner stability within ourselves. Like the power is in the present moment. And many of us are either, right, ruminating about the past or worrying about the future. And it takes us out of that present moment. It creates resistance.
Yeah. And that resistance is where I want to say the resistance is where the trauma happens. because that's so if you imagine, for example, the spirit was giving me the image of a palm tree during a hurricane. And it will sway and sway and in a way that you almost don't even think it could bend, but by allowing itself to just go with the energy of the air and the wind or the rain that's coming with the hurricane, when the hurricane passes, it's still standing, right? It can stand tall because it didn't resist it. It flowed with what was happening. And it's interesting because I just heard the word in a preservation, in a self preservation. But that self preservation is not a resistance. It's I'm accepting what's happening. I'm bending to what's happening. I'm adjusting to what's happening. And then on the other side, I'm okay. And it's really interesting as you were talking, I just realized I had an experience this week where I was speaking with somebody who is new to the environment we were in, and they were bringing their past with them. And in the conversation, I kept saying, so, if we're going to have a fresh start, if we're going to have a second chance, we can't bring all of that with us because that's not relevant to today. It's in this particular situation, it was like bringing baggage from a different place to the new place, right? But all of that, it's not the same people, it's not the same place, it's not the same situation. So, we're going to have to set that aside and I kept asking, "Can you give me the space to figure this out with you? Can you trust that I'm willing and to hear you and see your perspective and walk through this with you to have a fresh start?" But I kept saying, "But the only way that this is going to be possible is if we leave that behind." And I said, "I know you don't know me very well yet, and I know that you probably haven't experienced this perspective before, but if you trust me to walk with you through this, I think you're gonna be pretty happy on the other side." And it just feels it's funny because as you were talking, the spirit brought that situation so clearly to me, and they were like, this is what is needed right now. We don't know necessarily what's going to be on the other side. We don't even know if we're going to be safe walking through it. That's that vulnerability piece, right? Like, we don't know if we're okay in the midst of all these things that are going on, but it's that trusting that I don't have to bring the past with me. I can I can hold myself. I can have spirit hold me through it. And when we get to the other side, we're going to be well. And I think it's really interesting because when you were talking, I think we do this individual journey a lot. This big life changes, big transitions, and we have to hold ourselves through the fear of the unknown. But one of the things that's so different, I feel right now, is that this is very much a collective metamorphosis. This is not a handful of people or one demographic that's struggling. This is global unrest and almost like this understanding that there is a need for change in certain elements, but not knowing exactly how to get there, and am I gonna be okay on the way?
Yeah. And one of the messages Spirit gave me recently was about how loss and sacrifice in our life is often one of the most painful processes that we as human beings can go through, the experience of loss and sacrifice. And they said it's an absolute requirement for change. We cannot have change without loss. We cannot have change without sacrifice. And we're not just talking about endings of relationships or people passing from this life to the next one. We're talking about the ending of relationships within ourselves. We're talking about the ending of paradigms and belief systems and endings on global scales, right? We have all sorts of policies beginning, policies ending. We have all sorts of things happening, and it all feels like gross or collective loss and sacrifice for many different people in many different ways. I don't think there's a single person, marginalized or not, who isn't feeling the impact of loss and change in some way, shape, or form right now. And this is part of dissolving ourselves into the darkness, right? Because there is no light without really looking at the dark, right? There is duality in all things, light and dark in all things. And until we really expose all of the dark, it can't transform into its light aspect. And so we're doing that in this form of this mass awakening where everybody is being confronted with their own darkness in whatever way that, and maybe a better word to darkness is more shadows. We're all being confronted with our shadows, with our blind spots, with the parts of ourselves that are hidden, that don't necessarily reflect our most authentic, brilliant, majestic selves. And in order for us to arrive there, we have to be willing to face these parts of ourselves. We have to be willing to be radically honest with ourselves and also connect into that inner stillness within ourselves to be able to come back to a place of what do I feel about what's going on, right? We can very easily buy into what the media is saying and all the fear mongering. And we could get really sucked in and conjure up a lot of fear within ourselves by participating in those narratives. But there's also this place that I think spirit is calling us to, which they always refer to it as this like rise above. Can we rise above the fray and literally observe what is happening around us and bring that information back to a place of stillness within ourselves to be like, what do I really feel about this? How am I actually receiving this information? Because that's the place where we can decide what resonates for us, what doesn't resonate for us, and we can let the drama go. But when we really buy into the fear and keep ourselves in those fear-based patterns, we're creating more of that not only for ourselves, but for the collective.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I had a conversation with somebody recently who's peripherally impacted by a lot of the changes going on in the US right now. And in the conversation, it was, yeah, there's no playbook for this. And I think that is the point. The point is there's no playbook for this. And because there's no playbook, this is really stepping into a new world. We've heard the shift into the age of Aquarius and that shifting into a new world. We have so many shifts astrologically, but also I was recently listening to Pam Gregory. She's an amazing astrologer, and she's talking about like the yuga phases are shifting and all these huge cycles that are astrological, but they're also just over history, the way we've documented various cycles, they're all transitioning right now, which is to me, there's no playbook for this, just sums it up because everything is in shift. And so, on one hand, knowing that all these cycles just happen to be all culminating at the same time and going into something new to me is reassuring because it says we're right where we're supposed to be. There's no right, there's no wrong. We're right where we're supposed to be. It's could be difficult to feel safe in that transition, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, the whole deal. But it is as it should be. And I think that when I was in the records and the guys just kept saying, even though they were showing me all this stuff about how important it is to flow with the storm, basically, they also kept saying, but all is well. And that doesn't mean you ignore injustices or you don't have compassion, but it means that
There's a
well,
plan, that there's a divine orchestration to all of this,
it's a
that there's
divine
a
orchestration.
yeah.
Yeah.
I almost feel this like right on schedule, right on cue, even though it feels disastrous and it is chaotic and everything is being uprooted and it feels incredibly destabilizing. There is a divine perfection to all of it. It's our judgment of what it is or what it should be or what it's not that actually creates the resistance. And so that's where, as you're talking about how do we flow, it's pulling back our judgments, right? About how we think things need to happen or forcing things to happen a certain way. What I have learned enough about my own evolution is every single time I've pushed against what is happening, I have stayed in resistance longer than if I just allowed myself to flow with it and come back to that place of stillness and, okay, what if everything that's happening in my life is perfect? And that's the place where we relax. We move in more to the flow, and then we can ride the wave a bit easier. It's not that we don't see this chaos and whatnot happening around us, but it doesn't necessarily knock us off our rocker in the way that holding on for dear life really does. And that holding on for dear life is that resistance. And I feel like anytime we're in that level of resistance, spirit is going to show us how tightly we are gripping to what is not serving us to the point that we are so worn out and worn down. I call these moments the spirit's going to bring you to your knees moment because it's at that point that it's like, I got nothing left. I just have to let go and flow because I got nothing left. And it's honestly easier to be in the flow and moving with the current than trying to resist what's happening. And to your point, it doesn't mean that we're not taking action. It doesn't mean that we're not speaking up and speaking out and owning our power, but we're going to be guided to take the actions that are in the best for the highest of all, right? The highest good of all if we are staying connected to our intuition and if we're staying connected to the higher mind, if we're taking action from this place of our lower mind, from our ego mind, will you see in the world what's happening when egos run it? We're witnessing that collectively.
Yeah. And it's abrupt. And it's the you can feel the incongruence. You can feel the misalignment when actions are taken from that place,
Yeah.
right? Like something's just not right. As opposed to, whoa, this is a big change, but there's a different energy behind it where you go, oh, okay, let's see where this goes. It's so interesting. I had the most mundane example of this change in chaos and flow. So my daughter has just decided to change bedrooms and which is great. And we got it painted and got a new bed and got a rug, moved everything from the one room to the other room. So her old bedroom is a hot mess because it's full of everything that hasn't gone into the new one. But also, every part of the house in between those two rooms is in chaos because it's okay. I don't know where to put this and I don't know what to do with that. And it's that you clean out the closet and it's the mess before the closet looks beautiful. And not everything that you took out goes back in. Some of it is sacrificed, some of it is loss, but it's purposeful, useful loss. It's this no longer resonates. This is not needed anymore. And so yesterday, we at as I was picking her up from school, I was like, "So I'm gonna need you to do these handful of things to make progress towards this room transition before you can go have fun." And she did a couple things, but not very much. And I finally just had to take some breaths and realize she was fine. She did not have any attachment to how fast this transition was happening, that half of her stuff was in one room and half was in the other, and all that meant. She was fine. I was the one who had the attachment to this needs to be done. This needs to be different. This should. And when I finally got that aha moment, like she doesn't care. She's fine. Oh, okay. So how about I just focus on what I need right now? And what I needed was to wash the dishes. I didn't need to be worried about getting her all situated because she didn't care about it. And I feel like that's just a really mundane example of how one, change breeds chaos because I have this chaos path between the old and the new, and not everything from the old is going to come with her, but it's messy on the way. It's the butterfly or it's the caterpillar goo, right? On the way. And it's funny, back to that phrase metamorphosis anxiety. It was my anxiety of this transition and wanting it done in a certain way that was actually causing me distress. But when I just was like, I just got to let go and go do what I need to do to feel good within me, we were fine. No butting heads, no arguing. She slept in there fine. And it just shows how, like, this and that can be true.
Yeah, and if we're doing this with the small things, imagine how much resistance gets created with the really big things,
Mhm.
right? And I know as you're saying this, I'm recalling my recent trip to the DMV to change over my license, only to realize that their calculator didn't actually accurately calculate which documents I needed to make my license a real ID versus not. And normally I over prepare for these things. And this is the first time in my life that I didn't over prepare. I just brought what the document told me to bring. And of course, it was not sufficient enough to get a real ID. It was sufficient enough to get my license, but not sufficient enough to make it a real ID. And I was so annoyed. It was like this whole trip was a failure. And Spirit was like, no, no, all of your objectives have been accomplished. Like you are now a New Jersey resident again, right? So all of your objectives have been accomplished. You're fine. You can deal with this later. But the truth is, when I get still, I'm like, I don't know that I might be in another state by then, getting another license by the time I actually need it to be a real ID. Who knows? I have no idea where I'm going to be. But if I stay attached to this, it's almost like this need to do it the right way or need to have the right things, need to have my ducks in a row, even though Spirit's like, we're not guiding you that way. So why don't you just let go and let all of this flow? And we're going to show you what new adventure awaits a couple months from now. Okay, let me relax. It's not that big of a deal. But this is where I'm getting right. An ID is my sticking point. I mean, I should be grateful if that's my only sticking point right now, right? That I'm like, I'm all worked up over my ID. But I think this is what we do. Just with how we do one thing is how we do everything, right? And so I think that's the call for people. Where are you pushing against the flow? Where are you resisting your own healing? Where are you not wanting to, right, lean in? I heard an astrologer say earlier today that like this whole year basically is feeling like an eclipse, like eclipse season. So if we know how fun eclipse seasons are and the expect the unexpectedness of eclipse season, it's like I get that's the vibe that you were pulling from the records, like, expect the unexpected. I mean, this whole year is gonna feel like eclipse season, and so the more that we can flow with it, the easier it's going to be to maintain that inner stability and stay connected to our
Yeah.
intuition through it, and I think that's the most important thing is we have to stay grounded and we have to stay connected.
Yeah, and the image they kept pulling me back to was sitting in the sun, sitting in nature, feet on the ground, soaking in the sound of the birds, and recognizing the divinity of that, recognizing the flow of nature all around you, just flowing, doing their thing. They are not watching the news. They're not, the leaves in the trees are not worrying about the latest executive order. They're flowing. And that is something we can actually tap into. We can tap into that universal flow of nature to help ground us and feel what being in the flow feels like. Because when the energy is so frenetic, you can forget what it feels like to be peaceful and be in the flow. The other thing Spirit keeps dropping in for me, which is really interesting, is that I feel like this is coming because I've seen some stuff on social media where there's some very loud opposition to stuff going on, maybe rightfully so. Everybody's going to have their perspective, but it's about whatever is happening that you're uncomfortable with. Why? Why does it make you uncomfortable? Is it pulling something up that's ready to be released? Is it an empathic response to other people's pain? Is it some belief system that you have that you really stand behind and you want to be a change maker? And so you feel passionate about protesting or writing that letter or standing up for those that can't stand up for themselves. If that's coming again from that like guided action and that place of like, this is me, this is important to me from a grounded, flowing space, that's very different than this is coming because I'm so afraid of what this might mean for me. And it's sometimes when we least expect it, there's an unexpected move or a layoff or a health issue that just comes out of nowhere and you flow with it. You have no choice but to go with it, right? And the more you resist it, the harder it is to go with that. And I feel like that's something that we're being asked to really look at is this mine? Is this fight? Is this passion? Is this mine from a place of I'm a change maker in this area and so I'm going to stand up for this? Or is this my fear that's
Driving the action.
it's driving the action. It's like it's masking. It's the action is masking what really needs to be dealt with.
Yeah. I think anytime we struggle to let go, we have to look at what our attachment fears are and start getting curious within ourselves about the truth, right? Because a lot of times we fall in love with the fantasy of what we think something could be. And that stops us from dealing with reality as it currently is. And it gets us into really muddy water when we're fantasizing about something that isn't even real, right? It keeps us tethered to an idea of something that is not true. It might keep us tethered to an idea of someone that isn't true, right? It might keep us tethered to an idea of who we think we can or cannot be that is simply untrue when anything is possible. And I think that's the piece of faith that spirit's asking us to tap into constantly, which is like literally anything you desire, a pathway has already been created to that desire if it's in your highest and best, right? And so, if truly anything is possible, how do we lean back and allow spirit to move us in the direction of what we most desire without creating all of this resistance in the process because we feel like it has to come into fruition a very specific way? That's where we allow our fear to control outcomes because we're not trusting. We don't allow ourselves to just lean back and know in all of its divine timing or everything's right time, we will see the change that needs to happen.
And often my team keeps saying bigger and better than you ever imagined.
Yeah.
When we're resisting because we think the outcome should happen in a certain way and should look a certain way, we're closing down the pathways to the brighter and more brilliant outcome. And I think that that's the overarching message of the energy of this year is shift, transition, this metamorphosis, but it's also I love how you were talking about, like, blind faith, but in kind of a delusional way, because there's all this Neptune energy, and people could be very susceptible to following a guru or some leader and their stance that maybe it doesn't actually really resonate and align with you, but for some reason it's easier to commit to this path and this guru's explanation of the world than it is to go in and really look at yourself and what really is aligning with you. And so that is a big energy of the year and overdoing that and that risk of not being discerning of what's real, what's not real. We've talked about this with AI, with media, with all sorts of things, but it's also right inside of us. Which of our thoughts are real, which are not?
Yeah.
What belief systems are real? And I recall recently having a conversation where it's, yeah, it feels like that, but what actually happened? Just the facts. This is what you absolutely know because this is what you experienced right here. Everything else is conjecture. It's your mind going. Not saying it won't be true or not true, but you don't really know yet. And I feel like that's a lot of the risk of this energy is letting your monkey mind or your what ifs or your anxieties create a false reality that's just in your head.
Right.
It's not actually what's right in front of you.
And it's
And
still robbing you of your peace in the process. And that's how we get rocked and totally that's when the tree gets uprooted completely in the storm and falls over because we've allowed our minds to take us down, essentially.
or for me, in amidst this chaos of bedroom transition, I still was able to stop and go find my peace
Yeah.
and let go of that. Does that mean that I'm not going to have some inspired action at some point to make some progress in those areas and maybe straighten some things up? Of course I will. At some point I will. But the difference between that inspired flow to go do that versus the, oh my goodness, I
Yeah.
can't take it anymore. That's a whole different vibration. And so being able to find your peace and find your center amidst the chaos is the key to it all.
Yeah. And Spirit's reminding me as we talk about this to remind people that during times of big transition, we have to create space within ourselves to get quiet. We have to create space within ourselves for deep listening because the chaos externally is also going on internally if we're not on top of it. And this is one of the reasons I know a lot of people think meditation is all about stilling the mind and quieting the mind. And that is an objective in meditation. But the way I've been meditating lately is to really bring awareness to what is my mind noodling on? What is my body feeling? Like, what are the sensations following those things? Like, what is really going on within me that is calling for attention and just bringing awareness to whatever that is? So I can then get curious or I can then give attention to releasing those emotions, or I can actually look at, oh, here's a story that my mind is clearly noodling on over and over and over again. And so they're also bringing me to share mind strengthening activities. Our focus to our attention is really important right now. And so, where we find our mind falling back into these fear based patterns, negative thinking, drama, whatever our mind wants to noodle on that is not productive, all of that is creating negative emotion within us. And so, Spirit is saying, please stop the madness. Stop the thoughts. Bring your attention back to center, back to your breath, back to your heart. Even just saying that, stop, stop. I sometimes will just literally look like I'm talking to myself driving and walking. I'm like, stop, 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 because I'm just talking to myself all day long, telling this mind to quiet down, right? Because it very quickly will get a hold. Sometimes lately, what's been helpful is like having some mantras or affirmations on hand so that the minute I catch the thought, I'm immediately shifting to a mantra that I can direct my mind in a more productive and positive way towards something that I'm actually trying to create, not something that keeps me in some sort of pain or memory of who I was or what I no longer want to be. Right. And I think that's this mass awakening is being really conscious of how our minds are interfering with who we want to become. And mind, emotions, we're creating based on that stuff. So we want to direct that in the direction of the futures we actually want to embody, what we want to see in the world, right? Not what currently is in some regards. That's not to say everything is negative because it's not. And I think that's something that can be really helpful too, as spirit says things like, well, all is well. Well, there's a lot of reason we can look out into the world and say all is not well. But I think in those moments, it's also helpful to be able to pull ourselves back in a more insular way to be like, you know what? What went really well for me today? What's going really well in my life right now? Like, focus on the things that are going well and watch that expand. Because as we focus on our own vibrations, this is how we heal the world. There is a ripple effect positively as we put that positive out there. And so, the more of us that are conscious of what we're creating, even within ourselves, we are helping the collective in that regard, even if we can't tangibly see it in an immediate kind of way.
Beautiful. I know that the idea of meditation doesn't jive with everybody, but I have been experiencing the same thing where I'll be like, okay, so am I going to listen to this? Am I going to do this kind of meditation? What am I going to do? And I just hear, just sit with us. Just sit, just sit, just breathe. Come back into your body because I am so often out in my mental space, out thinking in the future, mentally troubleshooting, doing whatever in my head. And I so often don't realize I'm not even in my body, don't even know how I got from point A to point B because my body was on autopilot while my mind was going crazy. And so, just even as you were saying, the value of just sitting and returning to your body and breathing, that's enough. Just creating that space is enough to slow you down enough to realize maybe that one next thing, that one little glimmer of something. Oh, like you said, that awareness. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? What am I ruminating on? But if you're just go, 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 go in what to me feels like the collective energy feels almost like a mudslide where it's moving so fast, you have no control over its movement and where it's gonna take you. That's what it feels like if you step out of your own stream and into the collective stream. And so remembering to pull back and sit and breathe and spirit just keeps saying, and remember your divinity. That is the key to navigating this transition we're all in.
Beautifully stated. So, the other thing I just want to pull back to as we close up this conversation is the point you made about nature being non resistant. And so, for people too who are not big meditators, what we're talking about with meditation is a simple presence process, right? It's about being present. And you can be very present by taking a walk and listening to the impact of your feet hitting the pavement or whatever surface you're walking on. You can be present by sitting outside and just opening your ears far and wide to notice the sounds of what's going on around you, the sounds of nature, maybe the sounds within your house, or even the sounds happening within your own body. You can simply count shingles on a building. You can count bricks in somebody's house, anything that brings you back to this moment. Sometimes I'm sitting at traffic lights and I'm like, the sky is blue. This is a red light. Like, literally just naming what I see, because it gives my mind a job that has absolutely nothing to do with telling any kind of stories that are not gonna be helpful to me. So, hopefully these tips are helpful to people in order to help you all come back to finding peace and that centeredness through any of these storms, and we will look forward to speaking with you all next time. Bye for now.